Hello, welcome to another case study, Renew Education. This one is a very interesting one. We did treat this case. I'm not going to show you the end result. We finished him it took about a year and a half, I think, to finalize his case. So this is his initial starting point. We will show you another video that shows maybe the end point of where we are, what ended up happening. So he has red facial bone. He also has orange constriction. He has an orange failing front teeth. He has a light green patient expectations. And the reason why I bring up patient expectations in this one is because he is such a nice guy. He is such a nice guy. So I put light green in there because some people are very obviously just really, really nice, and you can see how genuine he is about anything you can offer him, he will accept. He's very, very understanding. He's very functional, which is great. He does listen. He doesn't necessarily try to second guess some things. He has good questions, but he just wants to really get back to just kind of chewing and smiling. He uses an upper partial here, and you can see the front teeth right here are missing, and that's why he gets the orange failing front teeth, because he snapped off a 4-unit bridge that was lateral to lateral on non-root canal treated teeth. So that's a concern. It's not a end-all be-all here with the red, but it is concerning. He also, if you look at his occlusion, they're fairly flat. So we're going to get into this case right now, and we're going to move on. We're going to talk a little bit about the bottom here, just in this one location here, but really this is about the upper case and looking at how much bone and what it really means to kind of move this case forward. It's not easy. So let's look at this here from the perspective of just looking at this tooth here, and you'll understand why he gets the ratings we give him. He has very, very thin bone here. His bone quality is good, but you can see how the constriction here really would affect on a lower tooth for sure, but it does affect it here. So this is a constriction. It's not a make or break. This bottom part, maybe you can even do a ridge split if you lost all those lower teeth, but very challenging to get an implant in this. This is just too narrow. Challenging here too, but if you graft this when you do the extraction and wait, you might be able to get some length out of that. And he has that occurrence throughout. So when we really look at how he's kind of functioning and looking at like this tooth here, really has some perio right here on the distal side of it, and he's got a little perio starting across here as well. But that's not the biggest concern other than longevity. The vertical root bone loss in these areas for perio, that's kind of a treatable thing. That's where it's just education, education, education. So he is, he's not used to a lot of the hygiene in his schedule. So that's really where I get down on the home care stuff. So here's that one tooth that has not really a lot of bone. And when you graft this, you're going to end up something like this. So this is a challenged area. It's almost 7.5 millimeters or something wide here, which means it constricts there. And that's what makes it difficult, is the constriction right here, as well as he's also got a fairly good flare angulation. I didn't mention that in the other one. This wasn't one of those cases that I was going to look at to talk to you about. But you can see that angulation here. That does affect the load of the implant here. Luckily, his upper arch bone is not too far from the incisal edge here, where if you put the implant in here, you don't have this tremendous imbalance between implant integration and what's coming off of it and the whole angulation to the tooth angle here. This is a high angled area. It's just that you have you're pretty good in length. Usually when you have this much bone loss, you're way up here, and then the implant becomes very, very what I call top heavy, where you have more tooth structure or crown coming off the top of the implant than you would really feel comfortable with. So if we look back over here on the upper right side, the upper left, let's look at that bone here too. So he doesn't necessarily have a sinus issue per se. Let me get rid of those measurements here. He's got a pretty good spot here for implants. His bone density looks good. So we feel pretty successful with that. And the width and the occlusal difference here. So all of this looks really nice. We are going to be going into the nasal sinus, so you don't want to go too far, and you have the maxillary sinus showing up. So that would be in the first premolar area, number 13, and into the first molar area, he's going to end up being something right here. This is not great. This is not so wide. And this is where you can see where the constrictive nature of a patient becomes a little effective in the posterior area. So that's another reason why CT is so important. If you measure this, he's got about 7 millimeters, which is great, but you don't have to do much more than a crestal sinus bump here. But if you then look at the diameter width here, he's at a 9, but we really are looking at not so much on that lingual, you're really looking at something more like a 6.7. So it'd be stretching it if you put a 5 in here. You should probably do a 4.5 or 4.2. You want more bone. It's not worth sacrificing the more bone for a wider implant in this case. So if you're going to side on something, you side on that. So here's that bone up here. You can see this is not that long ago when he had these extracted. It's still filling in through here. So when you look at the shadowing, he's lost these teeth not that long ago. Now, this case offers an interesting scenario where he's got 1, 2, 3, 4. I don't really count this one. 5, 6. He's in the 50-50 rule scenario. Remember, I have two 50-50 rules. One is if you have more than 50% of your tooth sticking out of the bone area. So here, this is the full length. And now I'm just going to kind of put a line across here. He has more tooth structure sticking out of the bone and less in the bone. So he's lopsided, maybe here 70-30 in this scenario here. We want to see that bone height really be closer to 50-50 on a lateral, something more in that range right there. That would be ideal, but he doesn't have that. So anything less than 50-50 is where I start to really kind of wonder, do we want to save this? And in this case, you know, he's missing quite a bit of bone here. If you're a periodontist and you feel like you can graft this area, or somebody that likes doing these types of grafts, and you find that they're effective in shorting or slowing down the bone loss, go for it. That's great. In this case, because we're just trying to preserve the bone, we're just trying to get something in the front, get him a prosthetic in the front. He wants implants here. Then we are just going to do the extraction. I don't believe we're going to get any bone height really that's going to make that big of a difference when we do the grafts and the socket grafts across here anyway. So what do you do with the second 50-50 rule? The second 50-50 rule is really about if he has 6 teeth or less, and there's a financial consideration, and there's other maybe bone problems with the shape or the geography of the bone, etc., you got to consider doing a full arch piece and the patient typically understands that. Sometimes there's patients that kind of have 6 or 5 teeth and they really are adamant about not taking out the rest of their teeth. I don't know. That's just the way they are. You have to ease them into the idea that they're losing a body part. So in this case here, that is a consideration. We've got enough bone to get into the posterior. We've got some bone here. We can put an implant in here, and we can do one here, and we can do one here. So that allows us to do the 4 implant locator or even a 6 implant locator. And then the patient doesn't have to worry so much about the perio and doesn't have to worry about matching teeth or more decay or something like that. So I do have that conversation whether they want to hear it or not, just so that they understand that there are other choices, because I can't read their minds. And so sometimes they actually change their mind. They actually think, yeah, maybe that is a smart idea. I let them sit on it for a day or two and make sure that the staff that's answering the phone understands that this patient is doesn't have a treatment plan because they hadn't decided on one. They wanted to think about it. So this is the case here. We will do another case study at this one, looking at more of the final results of what's going on here. The bottom area here, let's look at that real quick. That's the only tooth you really have to restore. You have a full occlusion across everything. He is a grinder, but this slope here comes from the old bridge that he had here. You can see how that was really grinding. But he doesn't really know where home is. He doesn't have a real repeatable bite. Whenever I see really flat occlusion like this, the patient's just sliding all over, grinding all over. And that's where you have to put this in group function when you do something so he doesn't bash out the implants at that angulation. So here we go. Let's look at this bottom area here. Not great. Not great. He is looking at here. He's got this constrictive area affecting the amount of bone width that he has here. So if you look at that, he has that little constriction. Here's the nerve. Not super wide. Not great bone either. It's very, very hard and dense, but he has some healing capacity here. Here's where the nerve comes out. That's too close. So this nerve has this anterior loop, but also the foramen is fairly distal. Usually the foramen is a little bit more anterior. He seems to be more around the mesial root of a first molar. So that would be pretty ideal. And let's just look at that measurement. I don't remember this measurement here. So if we measure across here, we got 8.5 millimeters. So you want at least 1.5 millimeters, in my opinion, on either side. So you could squeeze it a 5. I would probably recommend a 5, definitely no bigger than a 5. You're probably looking at a 4.5 millimeter diameter on the lower if it were me doing this one. Or even you could even do a 4.2. And the length looks fine. I would imagine that that's not the problem. He's all the way to the nerve is 16 millimeters here. So if you did the 11.5, you're right there, and that's to the top of the crest. So you might drop that just a hair more. So you're something like that. So you would do an 11.5 by 4.2. That should be sufficient. You don't have to make a major, full molar crown here. You can make it a little bit more like a big premolar, and the occlusal load would be satisfactory. So this is a really nice case to start off with. It wouldn't say that this case is somebody that's just starting to place implants. The measure of the diameter of that implant really has to match the amount of quality of bone that the patient actually has. You also have to just look at the flare, look at everything before you start a case like this, because if you don't think about grafting those cases, if you only have a Panorex to make an evaluation on something like this, that does not work very well. You're going to lose on a case like this. And unfortunately, when you lose the facial plate and you have the defect, you really lose for the patient long term. The patient is just not going to get that bone back until we invent some kind of block that just rocks the world and you can bring out that facial bone very predictably, or you have the height of bone as well if you want to bring up the height of bone. So that's it. The patient did not elect to do a full arch on the upper. The patient did elect to do single tooth replacements or bridge work in the front. So stay tuned with us on more of this case, but also give us a like on our Facebook channel, but subscribe to us on our YouTube and catch us on our live streams on Mixer and Twitch. If you have questions, we also do our live stream broadcasts on YouTube. So great. Appreciate it. Take care. Cheers.